Greetings and welcome. This is the third and final episode of our Future of Cloud series. The webcasts we've been delivering over the last couple of months. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner at Deloitte and the host of these conversations. Both our conversations with CIOs that are shaping the future of Canada and the hosts of the Future of Cloud series. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome back if you have been here before. This final episode, I think we saved the best for last. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. We are going to cover the cloud, future of cloud and implications to people, talent, and the future of workforce and digital workforce. This is absolutely critical to get right. And I think that what we are learning, of course, that organizations that do get it right are the ones who are reaping the benefits, and those who are not approaching it properly are making their journeys very, very difficult. And today, of course, we're going to spend an hour with a panel of experts who are going to be sharing their insights, coming up with ideas, perhaps, and helping you think through some implications and some latest research that hopefully will help you do this critical element of your cloud transformation right. So in the previous two sessions, we have actually covered. First session was focused on the future of cloud and cybersecurity, and how to make cloud transformations and cloud architectures designed with security and cybersecurity from the get-go. The second session talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning, specifically those capabilities that are coming native now with leading cloud providers. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the cloud-enabled digital workforce and other implications to the talent. Now, we are going to reserve about 10-15 minutes towards the end of this conversation for audience questions. And we are going to ask you to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A feature of this Zoom Enterprise platform. And so I think that we are ready to start. It's about 3 minutes, so people should have had the time now to click on their links and join us. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome three special guests and colleagues that I'm looking forward to learning lots from this morning. We are joined by Stephen Harrington, who is a partner at Deloitte in our human capital practice, and Stephen leads our future of work practice. So clearly a perfect match and a perfect panelist for this conversation. Also, Victoria Bovard, who is also a partner at Deloitte and actually leads our transformation practice. So she's answering the question of what is the composition, construct, organization of the people elements of the future of work, which is, again, very, very relevant to this conversation. And from our New York office, from the US, Diana Cairns Manolatos, a tech futurist at Deloitte, and the award-winning author, researcher, and storyteller. So thank you all very much for coming and joining us today. We're going to have a couple of sort of logical sections of this conversation, but we really wanted to start with unpacking perhaps the acceleration of cloud transformation and its implications on people that was sort of driven by the pandemic that we have been living through over the last year. So Stephen, perhaps to kick us off, a question for you first is to give us maybe your view on the current state of cloud migration and what organizations that are making this shift deliberately are facing. What are you observing?
Yeah, thanks, Dalibor. So as you mentioned, I've been kind of obsessed with this question about the future of work for about a decade now. I feel like that's weird, right? Like when I started thinking about it, we must be there by now, but it just the future keeps moving on us. That's the fun part. When it comes to cloud, one of the things I think about is, of course, we're introducing new concepts and new technologies that the organization and IT need to adjust to. But the question I really want to focus on is the workforce ready? And there's a couple of things to talk about there. One is, of course, the organizational challenge when the penny drops for the business that, wait a minute, this means that mass customization is probably no longer IT's main strategy. They're going to be product managers. They're going to bring in cloud tools. They're going to configure them once and then deploy them. That's one element of the change to get used to. But the other, the workforce challenge, a lot of it has to do with capability and capacity. And so maybe I'll start with the skills shortage. The World Economic Forum declared an emergency this year other than COVID, and it was the reskilling and upskilling emergency. And I think it's left a lot of us as employers in a position where our strategies and our transformation appetite are like writing checks the workforce can't cash because they don't have the time and they also don't necessarily have the skills. To make that real in a cloud context, we can all think about the thousands of Canadians who are in hardware domain expertise and have been for their whole careers and what this means for them. We've seen this real time on the ground. To move from such a deep expertise in how hardware builds infrastructure and then realize that at some point, whether today or tomorrow, it's going to be infrastructure as code. That's not a small, what's important to realize is it's not a small skill set shift. That's not a weekend course. That is, you're going to find some people that we asked to make that shift that won't want to, some that will want to make the shift but can't. And the question becomes, how are we going to help our workforce through those skills transitions? So, I think what we're seeing employers start to do is get a lot more disciplined about what are the future skills that we need, let's say in IT in particular, to power our strategy and our appetite to transform to cloud, exactly who needs to learn them, and then what are our build, buy, and borrow strategies to get our hands on those skills. The last point I'll make, Dalibor, just to underline the borrow element, we probably can't train our way out of this problem. Just in cyber alone related to cloud, somebody was quoting to me the other day of skill set shortage of 4.5 million jobs. That seems too far a hill to climb. But at the same time, in the US, just to give you an idea of how the employment market's shifting, we now think that by 2028, there'll be more people in the gig economy than in standard jobs. And Canada's following a fairly similar pattern. So my question is, are we really short 4.5 million jobs? Or are we insisting on putting people in jobs and some people don't want that damn full-time job? So we have to begin to think about how the future of skills in the cloud space isn't just about training and it isn't just about talent acquisition. It's about how do we access and curate experiences for talent outside of our organization as well.
That's a fascinating statistic. I just heard it like earlier this morning as we were ramping up to start the session. I'm blown away with that statistic. And this is happening now. Like this is around the corner, 2028. This is incredible. And what a huge opportunity. Of course, it's a risk, but also an opportunity for people who are attempting to solve their future of workforce problem in the context of cloud transformation. So, of course, we are now living the reality where the most of workforce continues to be working remotely. A lot of organizations have spent tremendous amount of time, money, effort on large enterprise technologies. But there are also, especially in the cloud space, many smaller, nimble, pointed solutions that are coming up. So there is a whole ecosystem of different solutions, flavors, different technologies that are and services that are currently available. How do you see organizations who successfully manage this challenge? What is it that they do well?
Yeah, well, first I'll just violently agree with you, Dalibor. Like, it's funny how history repeats itself. For those of us that can remember, Before ERP dominated the technology landscape, IT departments were being bombarded by a series of lighter, simpler technologies that were kind of reaching for ERP and eventually became ERP. Yeah. So we've been here before, but now we're in this environment where it's ERP plus. You know, some recent data we looked at suggests that large enterprises are using on average 200 plus applications to enhance productivity. So it's happening again, but now in a dizzying array of software domains. And the business is driving a lot of this because they're coming to IT and saying, look at this thing I found. It's going to improve my life. Can you implement it, please? So the challenge for IT is becoming, how do you juggle ERP in this complex web? And by the way, a recent Goldman Sachs survey estimated that over 1 trillion hours are lost in just the US economy alone on inefficient tasks resulting from this complexity of this patchwork technology landscape. And then, to make matters one step worse, you layer in related security challenges to this tech architecture. So I think organizations that are getting their heads wrapped around this are making a pretty simple strategic choice. Are we going to fight the wave of lighter applications and try and remain ERP and standardization focused in the main? Or do we bite the bullet and build the capability and capacity to do both? And it comes right back to that skills point I made earlier. Because getting into that ERP pattern was certainly one set of skills in IT, and this cloud domain and that complexity just opens that aperture.
So you mentioned a couple of dynamics here: increased complexity, raising expectations, but it almost feels like it's fair to perhaps say that in general, lack of capability and lack of capacity, skill and quantity thereof presents the most probably serious risk that we feel our clients are facing. Would that be a fair statement?
It is, and I'll throw one more idea into the fire for our conversation, and that is, it's just possible that we've been doing technology integration backwards. And what I mean by that is we tend to start in that complex web of technology we just talked about. I think it really does happen most of the time the way I just described. Somebody in the business identifies a technology, they get excited, they want to implement it. And their idea is, this technology is going to be a value and cost play. You won't believe it. It's going to be great. But we know through most tech implementations, rarely, and unfortunately rarely, do we actually spend a lot of time talking about how the work itself can fundamentally change.
Yeah. So
we're changing the technology, but we're not as disciplined about human integration and human architecture as we are in IT. I think this is just such a wonderful opportunity for CIOs to say, someone needs to step up and figure out how to design humans and technology together. So a really simple way into this re-architecture of work concept is to say, what if more often we looked at the work that people are doing at the back end of the technologies we're considering, and we spent time with that work, put it up on a canvas and asked ourselves, how could we get rid of the dull, expensive, and dangerous tasks in that work? How could we redesign the work so it had better outcomes for customers or citizens? How could we build more sustainability into that work so people actually want to stick at it? And then once we have that vision for what that work could be, work backwards and figure out what are the tech requirements to make that work true. We'd end up, I think, with a very different roadmap of those integrated technologies we talked about earlier, Dalibor, and we'd be getting at productivity. Because at the end, we'd be painting this picture of a much more productive, but also much more human work in the future.
I love what you're saying. I love it. But I'm going to throw out like a slightly nuanced tweak to that. I would say that agree that in the past, technology implementations perhaps have been done backwards around like what's the difference of the work, and then what's the technology that will enable us there to get there. I would say that people have baggage from implementations gone wrong, and that is making a difference in terms of how at least my clients, and I think probably many of your clients, are asking questions, especially with the price tags of so many of these transformations. It's like, okay, are we going to get that back, right? Are we going to actually see the benefit? Because what we learned on the last time around is that we put the tech in, the go live was flawless. Oh, wait, but the people didn't know what to do. And actually, they just kept going about their lives the same way. And shockingly, we didn't get the value. So one nuance I would put to that is that I do think that organizations are getting smarter. I do think that it probably could be happening faster, but I do think that I see more technology executives understanding and recognizing the importance of what is the end game. Now, the devil also is in the details, is that once you get in and you're implementing and you've got all the different parties and you've got the program, it's easy to lose sight of that. But at the outset, I do see a different conversation that I would have seen even 5 years ago. Just the nuance there. But anyway, Dalibor, back to you.
So Victoria, that's actually a very good point. I think that people are finally, but this was not possible 20 years ago when technology was still sort of relatively flaky and people had to worry about whether the actual software will work. Now, I think software works. The measure of success ultimately is a year from now, are people enthusiastically adopting this new way of working? So the measure of success, I think, is generally shifting towards very clearly the adoption of people enthusiastically embracing the new technology, as opposed to 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, when the worry was, will the system actually work? What are going to be the performance here? And, so I think we are all in violent agreement. And
Victoria shook loose a thought in my head that is, another interesting thing that's been happening recently, and it's also because of this whole next normal conversation about people who might be working remote as default. Well, they certainly have been in a lot of cases for the last couple of years, and those that might be working hybrid, is more senior leaders asking, what is productivity anyway? Yep. And how can we measure it? And Victoria's point is right along those lines, and being really focused on the human side of the business, where both the technology and the people hit the pavement, so to speak. Are we really getting what we paid for? And how can we thoughtfully design for that?
Yeah, and just to add in another thought in terms of measurement, transformation is not an overnight journey. It is a journey, and a journey takes time. So I think a lot of what I've seen in our research and speaking with clients is that people pick a technology, say cloud, they try a pilot, and they don't see transformation immediately happen and return happen overnight, and therefore they stop that project. There is a recalibration that needs to happen for people to really understand that it's not just technology implementation. That adoption piece is really important. The change management, the behavioral change, thinking about, as Stephen was saying, how you're re-architecting work itself for this new environment. Because when you go from, as many organizations saw, working on-prem in the workplace to remote, virtual, distributed work where people are not all in the same place, that raised a whole host of challenges. Just picking, for example, the data center as one issue. You go from having a data center that's secured within the workplace with a firewall to now having to move to distributed work where the workforce is not in the same place. You're operating in the cloud on some type of teaming solution, having to figure out how to do work differently and re-architect the way you're working is a big piece of that. And thinking about it in a way that's not just for today, but that if you go back to the workplace, you're changing those behaviors in a lasting way also needs to be part of the thought process. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, this is a very good point. So what the message here is there is architecture of technology that people who work in IT are familiar with. The concept here is that it's equally important, perhaps even more important, architecture of actual work that then architecture of technology needs to enable. But if we only focus on technology re-architecting, we might be just putting a fresh coat of paint onto something that opportunity might be lost. We need to be thinking of the architecture of that future of work and be thoughtful and deliberate about that to really gain the maximum value. I want to keep you in focus, Diana. Given the work that you do in Deloitte's research center, I would be curious to know sort of what are your thoughts about cloud solutions that are emerging to support this next frontier of virtual workforce and workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there are a few things that we saw accelerate, especially during the pandemic. One is organizations realizing that they need to be much more resilient. And so doubling down within the IT organization on agile, embracing new solutions for how IT itself is working with chat ops, cloud-enabled collaboration and teaming solutions, looking at hyper automation to speed development, to be able to have IT support really fast shifting business needs, and then reimagining some of the traditional roles and team structures and operating models to help support in terms of work, how they can be, I think as a point that Stephen made earlier, was be part of more of a product team with the business, with technology, and with workforce transformation, all work and operations, all working together to think about how they shift business products, solutions, and applications for workforce, for customers, because some organizations during the pandemic were positively impacted and had an opportunity to take new products to market. Some organizations had to think about bringing their business, if they were a brick and mortar, bringing their business to e-commerce. So how to quickly adapt, be part of a product team mindset to rethink the way that work was done, to quickly execute, to take advantage of maybe different teaming models to be able to do that quickly. And then to change the way that they were working in the workplace itself. So for some people that was working remotely and working at home. For essential workers, that we saw a lot of organizations thinking about how they could use digital solutions to protect the health and safety of their workforce who had to be there through cloud native applications. So lots and lots of changes. So I think that really, if I had to underscore one thing, is that it's complex.
Yeah.
And therefore, back to what Stephen was saying earlier about skills and having the right workforce in place to be able to team in an integrated way with integrated skills and the right skills to navigate that complexity is really a key piece of being able to be successful there.
So what you're really saying is that the business needs, so let me summarize this, how I took it. It is intense and complex. Organizations need to deliberately think about resilience. That will require the capabilities and skill sets that Stephen is saying we seem to be lacking. Anything that you think that, like, what is that it, or are there other things that businesses need to be thinking of or are required to do to manage that complexity?
So from a technical standpoint, there are a lot of things they need to be thinking about. I know we have a lot of technologists as part of this. So I think it managing the technology complexity as they move to the cloud will be a big piece of that. And so to some extent, that's having the right skills to do that. I think we saw really 3 things happen within the technology organization in terms of change to really help support the need for resilience. So one was the move to the cloud, realizing that becoming a resilient organization needed the ability to implement resilient solutions. And in most cases, that was a move to cloud. I think it was about a 30% increase in revenue for the cloud providers. So that really showed that in order to achieve that business need for resilience, the IT organization had to step up, and cloud was the big solution there. I think the second thing was, once organizations made this quick shift to the cloud, they realized that it was a whole new ballgame for security. You go from having that firewalled workplace to now a more distributed, heterogeneous infrastructure. And so zero trust security, identity, access, permissions, an integrated approach to how they're thinking about cybersecurity first cloud design was really the second thing that had to happen within organizations. And then I think the third was shifting the way that they were working within IT to be able to be more agile, to be able to work where the IT team is no longer in the same location. They too are distributed. And so the more agile, distributed way of working and embracing DevOps, if they weren't already, and functioning not just as an IT team, but as a product team, was the other shift that we really saw. So those three things, the dramatic shift to embrace cloud, two, as they embraced cloud, doing it in a way with federated security in mind, and then three, the IT organization really shifting the way that their operating model was functioning.
And so this is excellent. I love these lists, 1, 2, 3, that people can actually remember, right? I love that structured thinking. So thanks for that. We also know, of course, many of our clients are deliberately choosing multi-cloud environments or are ending up in multi-cloud environments. Any perspectives on how the organizations can leverage such a multi-cloud solution to perhaps better prepare or deal with the future of workforce?
Yeah, just I think that's absolutely right. I think all research shows that multi-cloud is the future. Whereas maybe 5 years ago, organizations would have private cloud, public cloud is now very much embraced. So it's very likely that organizations are moving to the cloud. It's going to be multi-cloud. It's going to be potentially some combination of private cloud, public cloud, and more than likely it's going to be with more than one vendor. We see that organizations want to avoid vendor lock-in with any single cloud provider. And so a couple of things that they should probably think about are, one, what is the shared responsibility model? What is the organization going to be responsible for in terms of setting up that infrastructure? And if you have multiple providers, which of the providers is responsible for what aspects of maintaining data and security? And in terms of the workforce, they're actually part of the workforce responsibility model. And so how are you thinking about your internal IT people, your cloud vendors, and any consultants that are part of maintaining your infrastructure in a shared responsibility model? I think that's one big piece of it. And then I think the other piece of it is our research really showed that in the US, which is a little bit more mature in its adoption, organizations have started not just to think about the horizontal aspect of connecting one cloud provider technology to another, but actually building the vertical cloud tech stack. And so I think the shared responsibility model is one piece, and how you're thinking about the workforce across the vendors. And then actually how you build the multi-cloud vertical tech stack on top of that, what orchestration solutions you need, what vendors you need to bring in there to be able to move data from the cloud to the edge to your on-premise solutions across databases. That full tech stack thinking is for multi-cloud is where we're seeing the more advanced firms focus their strategies.
So here is a big insight as I am sort of course, living through this transition as well. We're specifically working with CIOs, and I'll ask you to confirm if this is true or not. What I'm seeing is that skill set lack of skill set, expensive skill sets, and traditionally CIOs have been thinking of their IT departments as mostly people that are employed for the organization plus managed service providers. Like that was the extent. This situation that you just now described suggests that leading organizations are breaking down these boundaries, and CIOs ought to start thinking of their IT department as the full ecosystem around the world.
Yeah.
And it's the matter of figuring out, how do I become the conductor of the full ecosystem in the most competitive way, I guess.
Yeah, I'd love to take that first and then hand back to the rest of the group, because that is absolutely right and consistent with some of the research that we've done. Over the past year, we worked with MIT Sloan Management Review on an annual study that it's a global study that surveys over 5,000 individuals across global organizations. We interviewed over 27 companies with senior executives in different industries. And what we found through that research is that over 87% of organizations are thinking about their workforce in terms beyond their internal full-time, part-time employees.
Yeah.
So that includes gig workers, contractors and service providers, technologies as part of their workforce, apps and accessory providers. And so the workforce is not just people who are employed full time, it's much more complex than that. And our research shows that organizations are starting to think about their workforce as more of a workforce ecosystem with a broader definition of the workforce that needs very different management practices to think about how you engage and work with those people that are outside of the organization, but contributing significant value to work itself.
Yeah, and I mean, we've covered them, but I love the way you framed that, Dalibor and Diana. And we're really talking about our new weapons that CIOs have in their arsenal, some of which are just lucky to have come along. The next normal has made it possible to consider hard to find skill sets, perhaps in remote locations that will never come to your office to work. That's a whole new and much wider aperture opportunity. We already talked about, the gig economy opportunity, but the other one is this work integrated learning concept. So, because we are going to want to develop some of our people to catch up with these new skills and these new concepts. But how can we think about learning in almost a minimal viable product kind of way? There's this great NGO we've been working with here in Ottawa, who, just to prove this point, are taking retiring military members and giving them new jobs in cyber through 6-week to 3-month boot camps. And their only goal is to land that member in the SOC, in the Security Operations Center, to do level 0, level 1 support. And the idea is, once they land that job, from there they'll be able to learn the rest of the cyber profile, versus the only other option that was available to them, which is often a 5-year university degree. So how many of these skill sets can we take that new way of thinking about speeding up and improving the efficiency of learning and getting right to work experience, rather than do all your learning and then maybe we'll give you a job, or maybe we'll actually point out you don't have work experience yet, so you don't get the job. that whole irony is another area to explore for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe Diana, there's so much here. I'm gonna jump back to something you said about the MIT Sloan study. Around 87% of companies are starting to think about their workforce as more integrated, not just the average, not the traditional FTE, or probably, I think, inherent in the finding there was around not just the FTE plus the contractor, right? Which, has been a big part of technology organizations for many years already. Like, I don't think that's a shock to anyone on the call, but I almost think that in terms of our day-to-day travels with our Deloitte clients, like, that number is closer to 100, I would say. Like, I would be hard pressed to find an organization that's still just thinking about, it's our FTE and all FTE, or, you mentioned the managed service provider as well. But I do see people really opening up around how work gets done. I mean, I was involved in a workplace redesign for a technology organization, where they designed the work floor, the actual physical workplace, to have different spaces for to manage service providers or vendors or ecosystem players to come in and collaborate, because they were finding, and this was pre-COVID, obviously, they were finding such limitations around, everyone had a shared goal. I mean, slightly different goals in terms of trying to get to the future, but everyone had a shared goal of making it happen, and that they needed to provide those collaborative spaces. Now, that was pre-COVID. This is a time where we've learned and we've all been resilient, or not, maybe not all of us, but many have been resilient in terms of how to work together. But I just wanted to pick up on that. And I bet you if you ran the study a year from now, the number would be much higher.
Even higher,
yeah. Yeah, and
And
the data showed that is the expectation that organizations expect in the next 3 to 5 years to increasingly hire more from the outside to grow the portion of the external workers. And I love what you just said about having a shared goal, because that definitely came out in the research as well, that a joining force to be able to help start to manage and create cohesion across that workforce ecosystem is having a shared mission, a shared vision, strategy, and goals. And that really mission-led organizations were ahead of the pack in being able to better manage across their workforce ecosystem because they had that.
excellent. And in my head, I'm forming the vision of the next CIO standing in front of this symphonic orchestra that does require the drum section, but also the little triangle players and the first violins and trumpets. And all of them need to be wearing, of course, the right logo jacket, but behind that jacket, there could be multiple different logos in various different groups. So this is an interesting conversation. From what I'm hearing, Victoria, leading tech leaders, in addition to, of course, thinking about and executing against their technology strategy, need to and are already explicitly thinking about their current workforce, not just their current workforce, but the business's current workforce, and need to be working through thinking and designing what that workforce needs to be for the future, right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
what would be some of the lessons learned or some ways that you have observed leading leaders do this well?
Sure. Like two things come to mind. I'll go macro and then I'll go micro. Like at a macro level, and to be honest, Diana, when you were chatting about all the things that technology leaders need to be thinking about, like I almost got a bit stressed, right? Like, because there's a lot, right? There's a lot, and outlining the journey now, the journey in 6 months from now, a year, 4, 5, right? Like that's a big task, and I'm really seeing the execs that I'm working with being very clear about what they want to achieve, and trying to almost, like, to use your orchestra metaphor, Dalibor, like what is good look like? What does the perfect symphony look like? What are we trying to, who's the conductor, etc. All those things. Anyway, I don't take the metaphor too far. I have a tendency to do that. So that's where I spend a lot of time with organizations and being clear up front around the vision. I will go to the micro for a second. One of the things I've got asked a lot around is, can you help me assess my current state? And so we as a firm have invested quite a bit around the right workforce analytics tools for not just tech, but for the whole organization around current states. You have a starting point, right? Because you have hunches around, like, I've got this, and got this data center, and like, I'm not sure what's going to happen there, or, you have clear views, but, you don't know how it's, a clear view of the future, we don't know what's actually going to happen. But we are spending quite a bit of time with our analytics to get a view of the current state, to help define the from and the to. So I would say those are two of the things that are top of mind right now, Dalibor.
Fantastic. So we actually received a couple of very interesting questions from the audience member. I want us to make sure that we cover some of those as well. So we spoke about job architecture to design explicitly what will be the future work like as enabled by modern technology, cloud services, and so forth, in addition to a requirement to do the technology architecture. So the question came up saying, well, how is that different from the traditional BPE, business process engineering, that has been around, of course, forever. I'm not sure who, maybe Stephen, you could address that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll answer that in a couple of ways, and please pile on, friends. One first and important distinction is what are you putting first? In business process engineering, the process is the focus, and the work is an outcome of the re-engineering of those processes. Whereas when we take this work architecture approach, by the way, we still need people around the table that know process engineering inside out because it's really important to the process, but we're actually interrogating the work first and then figuring out what process changes are required. I hope I know that sounds like a minor difference, but it really changes outcomes. There's another answer to that question though that may be a little more abstract, but maybe a little more interesting. And it's about what we call dynamic work outcomes. So we saw this through COVID, and I'll use the public sector as an example. I had a chance to talk to somebody senior in government, and I asked them just for fun, how long would it have taken to roll out CERB? So our supports for Canadians who found themselves out of work through COVID, how long would that have taken if you tried to take it on in 2019? And their prediction was it would have taken 5 years, that through the processes and risk structures and governance they had in place. Now, as we know, government did that in weeks. So how did they do that? What they did is they focused on a dynamic outcome. They said, this is where we need to be in as short term as possible. And they released a whole huge swath of public servants from process to allow them to solve that problem in any way they needed to. It resulted in an incredible increase in productivity, and no process design in the world could have helped them get there. And I wonder increasingly how much of our workforce should we be releasing from process and focusing on dynamic outcomes. You know, the car companies are focusing on electric vehicles by 2035 and so on. The market is littered with these ideas. And I think it's one of the reasons that just the process view, as important as it is necessary but not sufficient to get at this idea of how we can really, in a disciplined way, reimagine work.
That's pretty good. That's actually, that was a great example with CERB, and we all know it actually worked, right? It actually worked. It was phenomenal to see, especially for us who actually understand what's happening behind where the sausage is made. This is truly a remarkable success story. Another question that came up, staying on the theme of public sector and governments, we are talking about viewing our IT department as an endless ecosystem that reaches into the various parts of the globe, and yet we still know that some of our organizations, companies, governments are still very concerned by privacy, as they should be, but are putting geographical restrictions and constraints on where data can be and stored and moved and so forth. Any sort of observations, thoughts on that topic?
I can maybe start on that one. So I think this is an area where really taking an integrated cyber approach to the cloud migration strategy is key. There are not just data governance being the and privacy regulations being the only area to think about. So I think there are actually a couple of other categories that organizations should be thinking about from a regulatory risk and cloud cyber perspective. So global and regional data governance regulations like GDPR, which even though it's a European regulation, it impacts data privacy regulations across global organizations. So that would need to be one of them. And then in North America, there are a number of other privacy regulations. There are the Canadian privacy laws. And so thinking about global and regional data governance regulations as part of the cloud migration and working with the cloud providers to understand how they're addressing those. And they are, so GDPR and Canadian privacy laws are already baked into the cloud infrastructure offerings. And so as part of that shared responsibility conversation, in the way that infrastructure is being created, that needs to be part of the conversation. So, but beyond global data privacy and governance, there are probably a couple of other things that organizations should think about as well. I think the second is industry-based regulations too. So if you're in healthcare, there are going to be specific regulations. If you're in financial services, there will be specific regulations. So one, work with the cloud providers on the regional data governance regulations, which they've already addressed as part of their compliance. Think about the industry-based frameworks, and then think about the broader technology standards. So there will be things like here we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. There are CIS benchmarks. So I think those are really three things to be thinking about: data governance regulations, industry framework, and then the broader technology standards as part of the cloud migration upfront.
And I will add one more. And this actually came out from one of these interviews that we've been having with a senior government leader who said, well, talk to us, right? Let's have the conversation. Like there are forums that bring together public sector leaders with private sector leaders. A very well regarded one in Canada is the CIO Strategy Council. Like that table has been established for the purpose of helping our society advance, right? If this is an issue, and it is, then lean in and engage. Let's have the conversation. I know, as also I work a lot with government as clients, they would welcome a conversation, advice, perspective, request. So that would be, I think, another element of this.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Dalibor, there's also an opportunity because to your point, like as exceptions are being made, I mean, it's a slow roll, but it does happen. That's one opportunity. The other is, of course, we're beginning to see providers locate more data residency in Canada.
Yes.
And there's this really interesting opportunity to inshore coast to coast to coast. And still find labor arbitrage advantage and all that good stuff by playing the geographies we have here in Canada. It's a big country, and there's a lot of opportunity there.
Excellent. A couple of more questions that I think would be interesting for all audience members to hear. Audience members to hear. When we talk about skills in the context of this reskilling efforts, what do you think, or do you know, are those key skills that we should be prioritizing in that digital reskilling effort? What might those be, or some of those?
I bet that you have a really good answer to that question, but I'm gonna give a less helpful answer, but just a little bit of a framework for how to think about it. I do think that we have to be careful that we balance our portfolio of skills between the technical and the enduring. Yeah, and this is a really important move that a lot of learning organizations are starting to make, because those technical skills, I swear we're going to be having this conversation 3 years from now, and it's going to be a whole new set of skills. Every time I see a list from a well-meaning think tank that says here are the 10 skills you need, I'm saving those so that I can be sure that 3 years from now it's different. So part of the answer is, as I said before, skills analytics to complement workforce planning. And it's thinking about your balance between those enduring capabilities. Like if somebody learns the architecture of code and they've picked up 3 coding languages, we all know that some people pick up that 4th code super easily. And there's an enduring capability there that we can identify and build. But I bet we have another answer.
Victoria, or
can I take a non-technical one, and then maybe Diana, you can. So one of the skills, and Diana, you were talking about this the other day with us, and it really struck a chord with me around like collaboration and cross-functional collaboration. And there's this HBR article which came out probably 3 years ago, and it's one of the ones I keep thinking about all the time. And I'm a big proponent of collaboration. And fostering collaboration within organizations. And that's probably because so much of my life I've spent between technology and business, and I've seen when it works and I've seen when it doesn't work, right? And collaboration is one of those, it's a, in some ways it's a skill. But it's a lot easier said than done. And even within our own Deloitte window, Deloitte house, if you peeked in the window, it's like there's pockets of us really nailing it, working together as one team. And then there's pockets of like, oh, that's weird. Why can't that group work together? And collaboration, this HBR article, one of the big impediments to collaboration and that capability is actually some of the things around soft skills. And I know soft skills is kind of an out term, but I still use it, apologies, around like listening and being afraid, not being afraid to be vulnerable, to ask the questions that you don't know the answers to, and problem solve together with people, and not setting up the boundaries around like, I do this, you do this. And so I would just pick on that skill set in terms of how we will see workers working together, and that focus on collaboration. Some of the things that prevent that skill set from enhancing really have to do with some of the things I just mentioned. But Diane, I'm sure you could build on that too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I completely agree with what you both just said. I think to be a little tactical from a kind of historical skills standpoint, we had roles like software developer, data and analytics engineer, architect, security engineer. And from a future roles and skills standpoint, it's not just software developer, it's more specific: cloud architect, cloud platform engineer, cloud security engineer, DevOps engineer. But I couldn't agree more with what Stephen said, that this list is going to change because cloud is, the technology today for building platforms, but we see the pace of how technology is changing, and it's already getting to the point, at least in more developed markets, where you're looking at not just cloud, but cloud and IoT and edge computing and quantum computing and blockchain and all of these other distributed platform technologies. And so I think, Victoria, what you were saying is exactly right. Looking at some of these more enduring human capabilities, like the skill to reskill yourself and learn whole new careers, and to take on those new technology skills is actually what's most important. Integrated skills like cloud cyber or cloud machine learning, that's really where the future is.
I think that's maybe a way to think of it is, we have learned through these pandemic disruptions that organizations that succeed are those who are able to become resilient. I would maybe even take that word and make it a trait we need to teach our people. Like we need to be, as individuals, practicing our resiliency, comfort with ambiguity, practice curiosity, and be open for continuous learning. I think that those people who are in IT now, who choose IT as a career now, it was always to the degree like that. But now and forward looking, you have to accept that you're going to be in a continuous learning cycle, and today is the slowest it will ever be. So I think I would actually just echo all of your responses, which said that the answer is actually not in hard skills. They have shortening half-life. The answer is in soft skills, which I'm starting using the term hard skills for soft skills, because those are actually hard ones, right?
Yeah, and enduring is a great way to identify them. Dalibor, the other thing I'd add to your list is just a bit of a mindset shift, and this is not just for IT. Beginning to try and culturally get people to the point where their sense of security is no longer in their deep specialization in the job that they're going to stay in. Their sense of security is in their next skill and their next opportunity. And there are a lot of organizations that have started to make that shift. If you can get the workforce's mindset into that space, you'll really unlock something powerful when it comes to
love that. I love what you just said, that your sense of security is in your ability to adopt the next skill set. That's fantastic. That's actually very, very insightful. We have a very, very interesting question from the audience around this concept of the CIO orchestrating a total ecosystem. So the question is, and maybe you can or can't respond, but I'll ask, where do you see the work actually shift from within IT to the business areas? Not outside of the organization, but from IT to the business areas in the context of this cloud transformation? And how should we think differently about the internal ecosystem in that future of work? Internal ecosystem, I translate as IT department and business facing departments. Any comments around that?
Can you hear me all right, Dalibor? Okay. Yeah, sorry, I lost my sound, so that blew my brains out for a moment. But I really like this idea of internal talent ecosystems that a lot of organizations are playing with, and that this question gets right at. We're actually often surprised by how many people have skills and insights and potential to lean to our efforts that we can't access because they just happen to sit somewhere else structurally within the organization. So especially in the US and with some large global organizations, we're starting to see them intentionally set up these talent ecosystems that allow people to, almost like an internal gig economy, put up their hand, join a project, and gain a skill in the process. And I think that's part of the answer to that question. And there's this also broader question about, is the future of most functions to be a technology-driven function? Yep. And how many of these key skills actually do we need to have picked up into functions all across the enterprise? Great question.
Yeah, excellent. Go ahead, please.
And from a business and technology standpoint, I'll just layer in on that to mention the most recent piece of research that I've put out through our cloud research, a new framing for cloud innovation. And with that research, we actually saw that there were 4 different areas within the business where cloud innovation and the IT team, CIO and CTO organization could really work with business leaders on cloud innovation programs. So the first was around work infrastructure and really creating the infrastructure for organizations to be resilient. The second was more around products and product experience strategies. The third was around their data strategies for the business and the cloud machine learning and data analytics tools and solutions in that area. And then the fourth was around the business aspects focused on platform and ecosystem strategy. And so hopefully that gets to the other dimension of the question of getting outside of IT and where cloud specifically is working with the business. I think that those are 4 of kind of the key areas.
That's excellent. And that was another list of things. I love it. Thank you very much, Diana. So what we will typically do is towards the end of the show, which is now a few minutes away, I'm just going to ask each one of you to give me, to give our audience members one sort of key takeaway that you would like them to take from this conversation. So maybe we'll start with Stephen. What will be your one takeaway from this call?
Yeah, I think as I hinted at the open, I think it's a great time and opportunity for IT leaders to get as disciplined about human integration and architecture as they are about IT. Obviously, HR can help, but when a CIO takes on that attitude, we see incredible results in terms of capability and capacity.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Victoria, over to you.
I think I would just say the key takeaway is, never lose sight along the journey of why are we doing this? What's the value? Because it's really easy to get bogged down in the details, and as organizations put in changes required, focus on value.
Focus on value. Wonderful. Diana, take us home.
I would say that it's an incredible time for the CIO right now. Organizations around the world have really realized this critical function and the importance of thinking in a more integrated way across business, technology, workforce, and operations, and the very critical role that technology like cloud has to play in that transformation journey. So I think just it's an important time for the CIO to support the business, and there's a lot of complexity that goes into that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So the spotlight actually is on the CIO right now, and they have the podium. Now, obviously, if any audience members would have any questions or would like to speak with Victoria, Stephen, or Diana, please let us know. Of course, we'll be happy to broker introductions. On that last note about the spotlight on CIOs, I'm very thrilled to announce that we're going to pick up with our CIO interviews. We're going to actually take August off, but for September, we have a very, very exciting lineup. On September 15th, I'll be welcoming Sarah Shortreed, the CTO of Atco Group of Companies, for the conversation. Then a week later, on September 22nd, Bhushan Ivaturi, the CIO of Enbridge, one of the largest Canadian energy companies. On September 29th, Tatiana Lalkovic, the CIO of Economical Insurance, a financial service conversation. And then on October the 6th, Monique Allen, EVP and CIO of OMERS, one of the largest Canadian institutional investors and pension funds, will be joining me for the conversation. So we'll have a rich and continuing conversations with CIO leaders. I want to thank you all very much for your attention. To the panelists, thank you for your thoughts and insights. This was very, very exciting for me. I've learned a number of cool things. And I want to thank the audience. I want to wish you all a very, very happy remainder of July and August. And we'll see you again in early September. Thank you and have a lovely Wednesday. Bye-bye.